Hi everyone, my name is Sarah. Welcome to Life, Loss and Hope channel. It's been nearly 2 years since we started these videos, and after many losses in those first weeks of starting this channel, sadly that my brother was tragically killed in a mountaineering accident, so I've really had to walk the walk and not just talk the talk over these last 2 years. So thank you for your support. Please continue to subscribe, to share and to like. Today I'm talking about some of the most common things that bereaved people say to me about loving again after loss. Things like, I will never love again, or perhaps it's framed as a question and they will say things like, how could I ever love again? I vowed, like many others, that I would never love again after loss. It's a common statement that I hear time and time again, and is a natural response when you lose a spouse, your beloved, that you poured yourself into and loved with every ounce of your energy, hoping perhaps that your love could save them. If I'd loved him more was a thought that went round and round my head for ages. It wouldn't have happened if I had. It's not a logical thought, but then grief isn't. In early grief, the last thing on our minds is being in another relationship, as we struggle to survive the intense physical and emotional pain that we are experiencing. And I'm sure many of you listening will be thinking, oh, I will never love again, or I'm not at that point yet and probably never will be. After loss, everybody copes with their situation differently. And as time progresses, as it does, regardless of our circumstances, pain and loneliness, we have to begin to rebuild our lives alone. Some people may throw themselves into work, and others may decide to cultivate new friendships or spend more time with family and old friends, or join clubs specific to an interest, or become more active in their community or church by volunteering time. For some, finding busyness with activities can become a good distraction from the acute discomfort and sadness, and also give purpose and new identity. And there are those often then who also refrain from dealing with the pain, and they bury it deep inside within. So we're all different, and the thought of loving again for me never crossed my mind, until well-meaning friends started saying things like, oh, you're young, you'll meet someone else. Oh, it's not good for you to be alone. My dominating response was no, I'll never love again. And I was certain that that would never change. After all, when you're grieving deeply and you're still longing to be with your lost spouse just one more time, it is a thought that feels so incredulous, insensitive, disrespectful and hurtful. I still recall my father saying to me in those early dark days, you'll find more healing if you meet someone again and you learn to love again. Because that was his experience, and to be honest, when he said that, I was mad at him for saying it. But then much later, I learned that in fact, he was quite right. But then I was pretty mad at most people in those days, to be honest. I was mad at my church friends who told me that Jesus would be my husband. I was mad at God, mad at friends who said, you'll move on, or that I would meet someone else. I can remember thinking to myself, if someone else says a silly thing, that the spirit of slap or shove would come all over me. But thankfully, I did control myself and that never happened. For those of you who don't know this, I have now remarried, and I do love in ways that I never thought I could love and be loved. But before I got there, I went through some dark, lonely, tough places. I had to learn to love again, pushing through fear by daring to be vulnerable, to take risks and trust in ways that tested the borders of my faith. So here's my attempt to articulate what it feels to love again after loss and after you have been devastatingly heartbroken. And I'm going to talk about specific parts of that journey that myself and others have highlighted. After loss, life certainly brings dramatic changes and often surprise relationships that we're not expecting or looking for. I'm certainly not advocating this for everybody, but I'm merely sharing my experience in the hope that it does bring you hope, encouragement, and perhaps a different perspective on finding love after loss. The most important thing to acknowledge is that attempting to love again in the way we used to before loss will never work. And often love shows up in a very different form that you would never imagine and haven't experienced before. From my current vantage point, looking back now, the journey has been complex, as the path has been scary, painful, and yet amazing, healing and fulfilling beyond measure. So going back to those words that I said many times, I will never love again. Yes, I did think them countless times, and I said them. And as a strong, determined person, you can probably imagine that I really meant those words every single time. When someone we love so deeply is no longer in our lives, we can never imagine loving anyone else. It feels impossible to even comprehend that possibility. My body and emotions felt numb, and my heart felt wrung out. Sometimes, if I'm really honest, I even doubted what love was. That even if I loved my family and my friends. So the thought of loving someone new was totally alien. Even when I entertained that thought for a moment, only because somebody else had mentioned it, it made me feel anxious and fearful rather than anything pleasurable. You may resonate with this feeling incapable of loving and that your feelings won't change. And that's okay, it's perfectly normal. It's a part of the journey that has to be acknowledged. Your feelings of never again are in fact partially true, as you will never love the way you loved your spouse again. That love was unique and special, and rightly so. It can never be duplicated or replaced, and every love is different. I personally remained in that I will never love again phase long after I met my second husband, because it felt much safer than the overriding emotion of fear in starting a new relationship. It's what I call now the fear part of loving again. Fear of being hurt, fear of being left, fear of making a fool of myself, fear of being too old, fear of losing someone else in my life. There was so much fear, and the glimmer of feeling anything remotely romantic sent me into denial as my heart felt so wounded. How could I trust anyone else with it? So I tried to convince myself that I felt nothing for this new person other than friendship. In the early months, as my feelings so unexpectedly began to awaken, I was more afraid than in love, and that meant that I was not very nice to him at first. I was very difficult, always pushing away and then drawing back, and not very lovable. Now I joke about that part of our relationship, that it was like a tube station, on, off, to say the least, and it took time for the fear and anxiety to lessen. When your heart has been through so much loss, it doesn't just go back to loving easily. It goes into a protective mode due to the hurt, trauma and loss, and therefore it's natural that we can be defensive, cold and not easy to deal with, because we build layers of protection around our hearts that are wounded. It's important to recognize this, that you are not becoming a horrible, unkind person. You are afraid, and because you are afraid, you're going to act out of that place. The new person that you are with will have to be okay with that and hopefully understand, especially if they're right for you. After all, you're just learning to love again and finding your new identity in the midst of it all. For us, as we had both experienced a tragedy, a loss that had destroyed us, we knew that we had to try and understand each other's different emotions and circumstances of loss. We had to be very patient as we gradually opened up that access to our hearts. Starting to explore a new relationship also brought a lot of guilt, a flood of feelings of betrayal, of unfaithfulness to our loved ones who had died, heavy guilt as if we were being hurtful, selfish, disrespectful, or minimizing the love that we had felt. Another common thought starting a new relationship was that perhaps it was some slight about the person who was no longer here, that we might be over it or love them any less or differently. This was not the case at all, because love is not of an infinite amount. And it may be helpful to compare this to the love parents have for their children. When a parent has a second child, the love they have for their first child does not lessen in any way. The amount of love they have to give increases. And for me, that was the same with grandchildren. I never believed I could love them like my children, but I do, and even more so. Comparing someone new to your late partner also is a fruitless exercise, as they will never fill that person's shoes, so to speak. So that's not to say that they cannot make you very happy in different ways, but it will never be like it was, and that's a good thing to acknowledge. It may take many years to allow yourself to love again fully as your identity changes after loss, because we're no longer who we used to be, and we no longer love the same, and that is okay. We realize that perfect doesn't exist in our world after loss. It's more about being with people that really get us and love us with all of our wounds. It's also common to lack self-confidence after loss, as grieving can deplete us so much that it's difficult to make even small decisions, think clearly, and be emotionally stable. And this can make us feel like we have nothing much to offer, that nobody will be interested in us, and what we do have to offer will not be good enough or even desirable. This makes it hard to imagine that somebody will love us that much again, especially if we have felt secure in an unconditional love in the past. It can be really helpful to recall all the things that your partner valued and cherished in you. Thinking about that and how much they loved you can help you rebuild your confidence and rediscover it. It can also remind you that you are lovable in many ways. I encourage people to write out all the things that their partner used to say to them and do that made them feel unconditionally loved. And then perhaps put the list somewhere where you can read it, often, as it's almost guaranteed to make you feel better about yourself. Loneliness is a massive theme that we've all had to cope with after losing another half, and can be the most difficult aspect. Everyone deals with this in their own way. Some people decide that they do want to be alone, and others seek companionship. But often life can lead us on paths that we didn't expect and that we're not really seeking out. Ultimately, we must do what we feel is right for us. It's tough working through the guilt, the confusion, and the fear that are also part of the aftermath of loss. But as we gradually do so, we may begin to think about embarking on a new relationship and ask ourselves questions like, is it something that I think is even possible? Is it something that I feel suddenly? Or is it something that may grow over time? Or how do I feel about loving someone when I still have such strong love for my partner who is not here anymore? What are my thoughts? What are my worries? And what are my feelings? It can be a minefield of thought. Wherever you are on your journey, remember that love is not a finite thing. It is so expansive. And once we have loved, we do have the capacity to love again. It is the most powerful force that holds relationships together, endures all things and overcomes all things. There is no safe place to invest love. To love at all is to be vulnerable, and that means that your heart probably will certainly soar and yet possibly even be broken again. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must never give your heart to anyone, not even to animals. Love is having enough courage to trust in its goodness and beauty one more time, and I'm glad I did. So today I'm sending love and prayers to you all as we share the journey.